Welcome to the podcast series, Talking Leadership Best Practice Network. Thank you for everyone to coming back for what I think is going to be a fascinating discussion around two topics, especially around the feedback and the comments that we've had already around the first two podcasts. So welcome back, everybody. So let me just say a quick hello. So Mr. Morgan, welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. And Alan, welcome back.
Happy to be here. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Great. And Ron, welcome.
Hey, Kevin. Hello, everyone. Good to be here.
Neil.
Hi, Kevin, everyone. Looking forward to a good conversation.
And Xanny, welcome back with your wonderful cakes in the background.
Kevin, I hope I don't make too many people hungry.
No, well, it's only audio, so we're pretty good. It'd just be us who can see them in the background there. And Eric, welcome back, and thank you again for managing us through this process.
No worries. Glad to be here.
All right, Eric, did you want to just start us off, set the scene, and then we can make a start?
So the first topic area, I'd love to get your feedback on this one, is the idea of having fit for future leaders, or you could add fit for future leadership. We might go to Xanny to start with. So future fit leaders, what does this mean for you?
I took a bit of a different approach with this question and thought about it. Are we developing fit for future leaders within businesses? So last week we had a discussion around who we admired as leaders, and all of us sort of were challenged with that question because we couldn't actually think of people that we really admired. So then it brought me to the thought process of, do we have the right leaderships in business right now to develop fit for future generations? So I think we have a lot of older leaders in businesses that aren't able to adapt and are looking to ride the wave into retirement. We also need to make sure that the older leaders are able to, be flexible and adapt their style in a meaningful way. And I also don't think that we give the fresh faces the ability to come into leadership positions because we're looking for that many, the years of experience. So we're not encouraging them to step into leadership positions and then be able to stretch their capability. On the flip side, though, we need knowledge and experience to attract talent because obviously you want to learn from the best. So, it's a two-edged sword. So I don't feel like that there's enough diversity. So there's not enough young and old, male and female, and different cultures within organisations to really make sure that we are developing fit for future leaders.
Thank you, Xanny. We'll go to Chris. Chris, what are your thoughts on this idea of future fit leadership?
I think it's something we focus on quite a lot. However, when you're in a smaller organisation, it's very hard to have that breadth of people to be able to choose and guide you. You almost inevitably end up with the person who steps up and has been doing it the longest ends up rising to the top, and that they're not necessarily a great leader, they're just good at their job, which is not the best fit in many cases because they're the people who've been doing it the same way for a long time. So you don't get a lot of freshness or newness when you do that. What you get is consistency. And a lot of the times consistency is probably more important on the day-to-day basis, but you're losing potential growth by doing that. It is a really hard one. We talk about it a lot. We regularly talk with our team leaders about them grooming people in their team to be able to step up and take their place. And I regularly talk about to my team leaders that I need them to step up and basically take my place. Their role should be to do me out of a job so that I can go away for a month somewhere to do something else and that I know everything's going to run well and things are still going to keep improving, not just, holding pat. Doesn't make it easy because you're sort of limited with what you've got in a smaller organisation. You can't sort of bring 2 or 3 extra people in to see how they'll go because you're really constrained with those, personnel is a major issue. And as soon as you've got 2 or 3 extra people on the shop floor, lots of people upstairs start grumbling, even though it may in the long run be better for you. So that's that constant battle.
Thank you, Chris. We'll go to Ron next. Ron, your views on this idea of a future fit leadership.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Look, this whole question around future fit leaders is something that is very dear to my heart, particularly given that my teams within TXM Lean Solutions and Best Practice Network, their whole focus is around developing future fit leaders. What we're pleased about is, our clients and our members, by the nature of their coming to us to work with us, says that they have got an expressed desire to develop future fit leaders. And that's why they're engaging us, right? So a lot of the value proposition that we offer is around developing that leadership confidence and is around where to. We do see that there's an evolution from a traditional leader to a future fit leader, as I'd put it. And as we discussed in the previous podcast, some of the key attributes of future fit leaders is their ability to effectively communicate, inspire alignment and control, and create a passion for success. The application of these attributes, though, that depends on the role that the leader has. What is their role within the organisation? So the deliverables of a frontline leader are very different to the deliverables of a departmental leader, or for that matter, deliverables of an organisational leader. When we look at this measure of leadership fitness, it comes down to the expectations that have been placed on the leader. And given all of this, I see there's plenty of forums available for individuals to develop their leadership competence. The key question that really comes to mind when we deal with the issue of developing future fit leaders is whether the senior leaders have got the maturity to invest in the development of their up and coming leaders. And the core requirement of a business, I feel, is for those senior leaders to recognize the need for leadership within their business and how they define the success of leadership, so that they do invest in those leaders. As Chris said, often leaders they're the best person at doing a job, and therefore they get put into a position where they're now looking after that job. The leadership competence is different for that. So need to really focus on the development of those true leadership competencies.
Yeah, some good topics there, Ron. Thank you. Neil, your thoughts on future fit leadership?
Yeah, thanks, Eric, and thanks, Ron. I really agree with some of the things you said there. I think there is no sort of one answer to this question. You've got to think about different organisations, different levels of leadership, and whether people are fit for the different jobs at different levels. For me, I was thinking about this just in terms of, what does the fitness look like? How do you define fitness? And for me, I've just made a list of some of the things that I felt were certainly relevant in the world as it is today, with COVID and all the other disruptions that are taking place. And I think resilience, adaptability, innovation, the ability to influence and negotiate. Some of those things are things you can teach in courses, and some of those things are skills that you learn through experience. So I think diverse knowledge, and I really enjoy what we do through the benchmarking in Best Practice Network as well. I think that really helps with that gaining diversity in your technique and in your knowledge. It's one of those things you can learn tools, and I think there's a lot of courses where you can learn tools that help people to deal with different situations, but there's no substitute for experience. And even though you might have the tools, you need the technique, and you need two things in conjunction with each other to be able to develop that. So for me, I think there's an awful lot of discussion, like we're discussing now around leadership. There's an awful lot of discussion. There's a lot of education around leadership. But in terms of getting the experience, I think having people to refer to, people who you can transfer experience from earlier generations, is a really critical part of that. So I think, as you say, it depends in an organisation as to whether the more mature leaders or the more experienced leaders are committed to actually make the interface and transfer some of that experiential knowledge rather than tools and techniques that people might learn in a classroom type environment.
Alan, your thoughts on future fit leadership?
Just picking up on a couple of the previous points, I think Xanny's question, are we developing leaders? Simply, are we developing leaders, and what is our leadership development like in organisations? I think a number of pieces of research saying that we're not developing our leaders either in volume or speed fast enough. And as I said, a number of pieces of research have pointed to that. And to Ron's point, it's great to see that organisations do come to other organisations with a view of developing their leaders. And I think that's core, that organisations have a desire and a recognition that they need to develop their leaders. I just came at it from the perspective of, what are some of the skill sets, what has changed in the world that may change what leadership looks like. And to me, I think there's two pieces to it. First, there's the first principles of leadership, the things we talked about in our previous podcast around setting direction, setting vision, giving people feedback, helping them develop, coaching, et cetera, et cetera. So those things are sort of the first principles of leadership. And if you even look at the debate around, the generational changes, if you look at millennials, what do they want? They want a link to purpose. They want to be developed. They want to know how they can contribute. So again, those first principles. But what has changed in our environment, I think, is one, we've had COVID. It's the pandemic and the crisis that's created. But it's also that we're living in a time where the speed of change is significant. What's the level of speed of learning? Knowledge is doubling every couple of years. So what's the context, and how the context of change? And so I think that brings us to a few things. This concept of learning agility is something that, as we go into the future, that leaders need to be constant learners, but they need to be able to learn quickly. Xanny touched on diversity. I think as we've seen over the last couple of generations, the concepts of cultural intelligence, social responsibility, diversity, et cetera, et cetera. So as a leader into the future, you have to be more attuned to that. We were talking in our last podcast about EQ, etc. And then the concept of lateral thinking or the pivot. Through COVID, we saw a lot of organisations pivot, and it's a word that tends to be overused these days, I think. For me, it's that ability, the speed of decision making. How are we able to actually make that move, think laterally, see the opportunity, and make those decisions quickly. And then there's simple stuff like being tech savvy in this digital world. And to I guess to Chris's point, and to Neil and Xanny's point to a degree too, the concept of reverse mentoring. Crusty old bastards like me who have been around for a long time aren't as tech savvy as some. So this concept of reverse mentoring and using those young people coming through to help the people at the back end of the careers become more attuned to things. And then there's simply this concept of the hybrid organisation that's coming out, this need for connection. How do leaders lead in a virtual world where we're not face to face all the time? So for me, that there are a range of things. The context has changed, and we probably need to focus more on those sorts of things around learning agility, cultural sensitivity, lateral thinking, being tech savvy, and then how do we manage that connectedness in a virtual world?
We've got Neil with his hand up. Neil, what did you want to say, mate?
Yeah, I just wanted to build a little bit on what Alan was saying there. I really like what you said, Alan. It's great. And I think one of the things I just wanted to pick out from our point of view is that some of the things that Alan talked about there around like culture and diversity and the two-way street, reverse mentoring, that kind of thing. A lot of that stuff used to be it wasn't explicitly called out. And now I think it's kind of explicitly called out. It's almost an expectation of business these days. These things are built in. So although a really good leader in the past might have just developed those skills and knew that they got better results from those things, diversity and things like that, now it's kind of explicitly called out. It's a set KPI in the business. So I think some of those things, the framework around the environments that we work in now is much more literal. It's much more explicit. And I think that actually helps to develop the environment in which new leaders are developing. I really like the reverse mentoring thing, though. You need the diversity then with the old skills and the new skills to be able to bring together the best of the two. So I think, I just wanted to mention that explicit framework, I think, really gives a better environment for developing more fit for future leaders.
Sorry, yes, I just wanted to jump in with the reverse mentoring. I really like that terminology as well, but I don't know that it happens successfully within businesses. You've got to have egos aside in order for that to happen. And I think it's a great concept, but I don't see it in a lot of organisations that I'm involved in.
Thanks, Annie. Kevin, you wanted to say something, mate?
Yeah, that's great conversations, some great pickups but I just wanted to explore, and I'll share something we did that Eric and I, when we put the question together, there was is it fit for future or future fit leaders? Because I think there's a slight difference in the way you look at it. Is traditionally we might have are we fit for the future in terms of I've got a plan here, I've got to deliver a 10-year strategy, what do I need to deliver the plan? There's also the future fit, which is about, but there's also this external environment, which I think we've been talking about, is about, the way the economy is changing, the way technology is changing, the way we're going to have to deal with ambiguity, the way we're going to deal with rapid change. Is you can flip that question both ways. And I'm pretty, and I know there's some very much talk about the coaching and the support and the skills, but there's also about the ability of new existing, because I think this whole reverse coaching mentoring is quite interesting about what about the capability of our leadership to be able to manage what's coming up. I think Alan said, technology and knowledge is going quickly, so rapid. There could be that next year we're thrown, hopefully not something else, but our ability to also lead in that environment, I think, is something that we've really got to bring into our leadership capability. And I've got my plan, got my go, but I get in this morning and I've got a phone call and something else has happened. So I think it was a really interesting one in terms, and I think it started to come out, is we've got a very internal view. Have I got leaders who can take the organization forward? But I think there's some leaders, future fit leaders, where they've got to be ready to almost manage and deal with what's coming their way. So I think for me, there's two different ways of looking at this.
I see multiple hands raised here. I just wanted to make sure we get this on the record in terms of themes that have come out. And I have to agree with Kevin here that the list of themes that I was furiously writing out as you were all speaking is capacity, a willingness to engage in developing your leaders, and understanding what capabilities you have internally to do that are all very, very critical things to have when you're developing your leaders, but they're very much internally focused. And I would argue, and I'm happy to be corrected here, but I think leaders into the future will also be shaped and will need to be skilled up to deal with very rapidly changing external environments. And given that the majority of our external, so for example, export markets are in the Asia Pacific region, are we developing leadership understanding the cultural differences and what leadership is expected outside of the Australian context? Now, I don't have a lot of experience in this area, and I've only done a few podcasts with leaders with extensive international experience, but I think there may be a slight disconnect there. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but if we were in a perfect world, we wouldn't be having this conversation about developing future leaders if that vista was perfect. So that's my summary as it stands now, but happy to be taken on any of those. I might go to Xanny next, then Ron, and then Alan. Xanny?
Going back to what Kevin said, I think that as well, that attracting and having a pipeline of talent will be challenging going forward as well, because we've got a massive skills shortage in all levels. So I know that is definitely a challenge for us currently.
Thank you. Ron?
I think the organic progression of this conversation sort of really highlighting the complexities in itself. You know, when we talk about future fit leaders, there's a few things that are, I think, quite relevant for us to focus on. When we talk about leadership, I guess 3 core areas of focus that are required of leaders. So one is to maintain the standards that have been set. And the next level of a leadership is all about improving on those current standards. And then you've got the third layer of innovation. Now, the changing dynamic of the work environment, the changing dynamic of society and expectations, the evolution of just human interaction requires leaders to be focused on innovation on all of those aspects and introducing and filtering down those changes through the business. But again, depending on the role that you have within the business, it is just as important to have the leaders that can maintain the standards that have been set and ensure that the performance of the business is at the level that it needs to be. And there is a continuous improvement cycle to that. So as we dig into these, you know, it can become a myriad of directions that you could follow through, but the importance of understand where you sit in that hierarchy of innovation and leadership drive, and ensure that there is a constant focus on where to. And that's a key driver of the business is the where to, and a key driver of leaders is ensuring that performance is achieved.
Thanks, Ron. Alan?
Just picking up on a few of those points again. So to Xanny's point about egos and are people willing to mentor both ways in organisations, I think, Xanny, you're probably right that there's a degree of ego that gets in the way. But to one of Ron's points earlier, organisations need to be very intentional about this stuff. So if you do recognise that there is a need for development and mentoring and reverse mentoring inside of a business, you need to be intentional and actually put things in play, put processes in place to drive that sort of thing. To your point, Eric, about culturally aware Asia Pacific, etc. Now, I've had a little bit of experience with some international assignments, etc. The lesson for me is, we've got to understand that we are the ones that are different, and you've got to go out there with an open mind and learn and be prepared to make some changes based on those cultural differences. And to Ron's point, I think around maintaining the standards and then looking for innovation, and we've talked a little bit about where people sit in an organisation and what their leadership roles are. Again, going back to some of the research on leadership development, one of the findings is, to be effective, an organisation needs to settle on a set of leadership competencies or capabilities that are fit for them. And in doing so, I think by doing that, to Ron's point, if you develop and have your own bespoke leadership model, if you like, that allows you to be, again, intentional about what the leadership role is in what part of the organisation, who is responsible then for maintaining the standard.
You know, picking up on, I think there's some great couple of points we're talking about. You know, we know there's some very traditional good ways of developing leaders. There's a lot of standard work and a lot of great experiences with running family business with Xanny and all the way through to the large corporates. So I think some great stuff there. It is this other bit of externally now. And this is where I think some of the reverse coaching mentoring can really help, is bringing in people who are actually quite happy to use technology or deal with a bit of ambiguity. I'm quite happy not to know what I've got to do next week yet, you know, and almost reverse coaching and mentoring that back up and going, a bit like the kids coming and say, look, chill, Dad, don't worry, we can do this. We'll go online or we'll do something, or let's have a chat. Is almost that a little bit of that reverse coaching mentoring we may have been talking about earlier. And it's that ability to deal with that, which I think is really interesting. I think it's a topic that adds this diversity again in our thinking, which is even making the topic more complicated, because it wasn't just about delivering a plan. Now it's a plan with everything else that fits on top of us. So it's an interesting dynamic that I think we've learned over the last 18 months.
Xanny? Then we'll go to you, Chris. Sorry, man.
All I was going to add into that is, with the reverse mentoring, it's also about giving the leaders enough rope for them to have a crack at things too. So the younger leaders is making sure that they understand that it's okay to fail, because that's the best way to learn. So we just need to make sure that in our messaging that we are empowering the younger leaders just to have a crack, have a go.
Can I, Eric, I've got just a little bit on that one. Sorry, Chris, before we go through, I think it's really things are terminology as well. So very traditionally it would have been, it's okay to fail. It's okay to get it wrong. I was talking with University of Sunshine Coast, and they were saying the language they're hearing, it's okay to give it a go. It's okay to experiment. So there's a whole different psyche around this now in terms of traditional. It's about, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to upset the boss. I don't want to make the number. Where, in the future, it's got to be, well, let's give it a go. There was an interesting conversation. It's about the language that's being used now. Be like, Xanny, give it a go. You're still learning, but you're learning in an experimental way, not in a, I've got it wrong, therefore I've got to recover view. Christopher, so you had your hand up.
No, that's fine. It's an interesting thing, and it's a combination of the things that are being said. And I think a lot of the issues we're having going forward is actually us. We're pushing our guys to say, yep, process is the way to go. You get a process in place, you follow the process, and you do all this sort of stuff. But by the way, feel free to jump out of that process and try something radical. And there's a bit of confusion amongst the younger leaders, because they're going, well, hang on, you've just spent the last umpteen years saying process, standard work. But if you want to throw it out and try something different, go for it. And they're really struggling with that. And it's that I'm ending up having to say, yes, I know you've got a plan. I don't care. Try something different. And I'm not sure if that helps or makes it more confusing for the newer leaders, because in some respects, they want you to say, here's the plan for the next 6 weeks, and we're going to go step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. But then in step, week 2, I'm going to say, you know what, let's try something completely different, turn left and see how that goes. And if it fails, doesn't matter, we'll come back on track and try something else. So I think we're setting up a bit of a, what's the word, we're confusing them, I think, with the two different languages, and maybe the use of the word fail is part of that, where we're saying it's okay to fail, maybe a change of wording to say it's okay to try something different, and if it doesn't work, we'll just move on. So I think we're having this issue now where we've got these newer leaders that we're trying to bring up fairly quickly because of the lack of people and the difficulty in getting good people, but now we're getting the mixed messages as well. And in the current environment, you have to do these rapid changes all the time, but you've still got this long view of getting this process and getting all your standard work pumping along.
One thing you've identified there, Chris, I don't think it's a failing of organisations. It's just a reality, is how prepared is a business owner or senior leadership prepared to back themselves to say to younger leaders, give it a go. We don't care if you fail. We just want you to try something. And if the feeling amongst junior leaders, because we've all been in junior roles before, if I got the feeling that my bosses, when I was on the come up, didn't really support me having a go and potentially failing, I wasn't going to put myself or the people around me at jeopardy. And I think people's BS radar is quite attuned. And if you don't think you're getting fed the reality of the situation, you're not going to want to do it. The other thing that you bring in with what you just said, Chris, and it's something I think is worth exploring, maybe not in this podcast, but definitely I want to ask the question, what is our current leadership in our organizations, if I can put it that way? What is their desire for ambiguity? What is their ability to deal with change? And I think this is a question that doesn't often get explored enough, in my estimation, that one leader's appetite for ambiguity and change will be very different to another. And I think that changes depending on the level of leadership that you're talking about. I think leaders are dealing with ambiguity in very different ways. And if you can cast your mind back to our previous podcast when we're talking about foresight and strategic planning, we've got strategic plans now that may not be worth the paper they're written on, given we may not know what's going on tomorrow, let alone next week. So this idea of agility, I forgot which, I think it might have been Neil that brought up about having an agile leadership mentality is something that I think needs to be developed if it's not already there. Alan, you had your hand up?
Yeah, picking up on a few of those things, dealing with ambiguity or managing ambiguity, and more pertinently, I guess, being comfortable with ambiguity is a big thing. And I think you mentioned it there, Eric. In different levels of leadership, as you move through an organisation, if you just use the sort of typical hierarchical view, as you move through an organisation, you need to become more comfortable with ambiguity because things are going to change around you, and the speed at which we're changing is phenomenal. So that is a core competency of mid to senior leaders, I think, is being comfortable with ambiguity. And to Chris's point about letting people give things a go, it's a question, I think, very simply of a leader, depending on where you are in an organisation, being able to communicate where the priorities are currently and what's changing, and just making sure that, we talked about in our last podcast the importance of communication. Now, it's an overused word, but communicate, tell them what you've told them, etc. So it's very important for a leader, I think, to be able to communicate when a priority changes and the reason for that change. We can't just say we've got to do it differently because something's changed. We need, in this day and age, with the expectations of our workforce, we need to be able to explain the context and let people know why the priorities change. But it's critical that we do engage in that communication and give people that context again of, yes, we were planning this, but we need to do this because this, and this. Again, it comes back to some of those first principles of leadership, if you like.
So that brings us to the end of this third episode of the podcast. I'd like to thank Ron Spiteri, Christopher Morgan, Neil Cordon, Xanny Christophersen, Alan Muntz for being guests on today's podcast, and of course for Kevin Bennett for organising the podcast session. Again, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you all on the next podcast.